There was a moment, and if you grew up black in America in the 1970s, you know exactly the moment I'm talking about, when you stepped 1 foot off the porch. Just 1 foot. And before that second foot could follow the first, before you could even take a full breath of that outdoor air, a voice came at you. Not loud necessarily, not mean, just certain. The way only one kind of voice can be certain. Boy, where you think you going? And it was never just a question about geography. It was never just about the corner store or your friend's house 3 doors down. It was a question about who you were, about who was watching, about what kind of neighborhood this was and what kind of child you were going to be inside of it. Because in a black neighborhood in the 1970s, the block had rules. Not rules written down anywhere, not rules anybody posted on a sign, but rules that every child knew by the time they were old enough to run, and rules that every adult enforced regardless of whether the child in question was their own. That was just how it was done. The whole block was your parent, and the whole block expected something of you. Those rules are gone now, family. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that the children growing up today don't have the same floor under their feet that you had under yours. They don't have the same invisible fence. And I believe, with everything in me, that we lost something when we lost those rules. Something we haven't been able to replace. Today we're going to remember every last one of them. Hey family, I'm James. And today we are going back to the black neighborhoods of the 1970s. The blocks, the front porches, the back alleys, the church steps, the corner stores, and all the in-between spaces where an entire community raised its children together. We're talking about 30 forgotten neighborhood rules, the unwritten code, the law that nobody passed but everybody kept. Now, before we go any further, if this is your first time here with us, I need you to do me a favor. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Ring that bell so you don't miss a single video. This channel is for the folks who remember, and for the children and grandchildren who want to understand the world that made them. We are building a family here. So go on, do that, and then come right on back, because what I'm about to take you through is something you've been missing for a long time, whether you knew it or not. Let's get into it. Now I want to tell you these 30 rules the way the rules themselves were passed down. Not all at once, not in a lecture, in layers. Because the rules of a black neighborhood in the 1970s didn't come to a child the same way they came to a grown man. And they didn't come to a grown man the same way they came to the old ones. The elders who had built those neighborhoods carried the rules in their bones, in their blood, the way you carry the memory of a song you learned before you knew words. The men in their prime kept the rules with intention, a deliberate choice every day to hold up a certain kind of world. And the children received the rules from the outside in, through correction and observation, and the slow accumulation of 1,000 small lessons. So that's how we'll tell it today. We start with what the elders carried, then we come to the fathers and the mothers in their prime, and then we arrive at the children, at the rules as a child felt them, lived them, breathed them in without even knowing it was happening. 3 generations, 1 code. Let's begin. Number 1. Respect the elders before you respect yourself. This was the first rule. Not the first rule anybody told you. It was the first rule you understood before you could name it. The old people on the block were not suggestions. They were not background. They were the foundation of everything, and they were treated accordingly. And I'm not talking about a casual, nodding kind of respect. I'm talking about something physical and deliberate. When an elder came down the sidewalk, you moved. Not a little, you moved all the way. You stepped off the concrete if you had to and let them pass. When an elder spoke to you, you stopped what you were doing entirely. You turned your body toward them. You did not continue bouncing a ball or picking at your fingernails or doing anything else with your hands while an elder was speaking. Those hands went still. Your eyes came up. And you said yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, and you meant it. Or you suffered the consequences of not meaning it later when your own people heard about it, because they always heard about it. That's the first thing you learned. The block was a network. Information traveled on it faster than any telephone wire. An elder named Mr. Cecil, who sat on his porch from 2 in the afternoon until the streetlights came on, saw everything that happened on his end of that street, and had methods of communication that no child ever fully mapped. But you knew the reach of it. You had learned its reach the hard way, usually once, usually when you were 7 or 8, usually in a manner you never forgot. And after that, you respected the elders before you respected yourself, because you understood that they were the reason the street worked the way it worked, and without them, without their watching and their caring and their willingness to say something when something needed to be said, the whole thing would have come apart. They were not old. They were load-bearing. You understood that even at 9 years old. Number 2. You speak when spoken to, but you also speak when you're not. This one confused a lot of children the first time they ran into it, because it seemed like a contradiction. Speak when spoken to. Yes, you knew that one. But the elders on the block expected more than that. They expected you to initiate the greeting. Not wait to be addressed, not slip past unacknowledged. Initiate. Good morning, Miss Odell. Evening, Mr. Patterson. How are you today, Miss Clara? And it had to be specific, it had to use the name. Because a greeting that does not use a person's name is just a noise. A greeting that uses the name says, I see you. I know who you are. You are not invisible to me. In a world that worked very hard to make black people invisible, that refused to print their names in newspapers except when there was trouble, that called grown men boy and grown women by their first name without permission, the deliberate use of a name was a radical act. The elders knew this. They taught it to the children not as etiquette but as education. You will say my name because I am a person, and my name is mine, and when you say it, you are practicing a kind of humanity that you will need to carry with you your whole life. The children who did this naturally, who moved through the block greeting every elder by name, were the children the elders pointed to. They talked about those children with pride to their own families at dinner. They were watching. They were always watching. And what they were watching for was character and formation. Number 3. Old people's houses were sacred ground. You did not go into an elder's house without an explicit invitation, not to retrieve a ball that had rolled onto the porch, not to take a shortcut through the yard, not for any reason that you invented for yourself. An elder's property was sovereign territory, and your presence on it without permission was a violation of something much larger than trespassing. It was a violation of the understanding that these people had earned their space, earned their quiet, earned the right to have their porch and their yard and their front room be their own. Children who didn't understand this got educated quickly. And the education did not come from the elder alone. It came from every adult in proximity who witnessed the disrespect and responded to it as if it were an offense against them personally. Because it was. Number 4. Every man on the block had authority over every child on the block. This is the one that sounds strangest to modern ears. But hear me out, because this was not a violation of anything. This was the architecture of the neighborhood. In a black neighborhood in the 1970s, the concept of other people's children was not fully operative. Your child was not your private property in the way the world thinks of that now. Your child was a member of the community, and the community had both the right and the obligation to correct that child when correction was warranted. Mr. Williams 3 doors down did not ask your permission before he told your son to pull his hands out of Mrs. Patterson's flower bed. He just told him. And your son knew. Every child on that block knew that Mr. Williams' word had the same weight as his own father's word. Different voice. Same authority. And here is the crucial part. Your parents backed it up. Always. If Mr. Williams said something to you and you came home and told your mother, she did not call Mr. Williams to verify his account. She did not ask you for your version first. She asked you one question. What did you do? Because the assumption, the bedrock assumption of the neighborhood, was that you had done something, that the correction had been warranted, that Mr. Williams, who was a grown man with good sense and community standing, had not invented a problem out of thin air. Trust flowed toward the adult, always. And a child who understood this was a safer child. A child who understood that the entire block was watching and the entire block had authority over you. That child walked straighter. Number 5. You did not embarrass your family in public. This rule had no exceptions. None. The neighborhood was small and the memory was long, and what you did on a Tuesday afternoon was still being discussed on a Saturday morning, and it would circle back to your household before the week was out. Every child on that block was a representative of their household, whether they liked it or not. Your behavior was not your private business. It was information about your family, and your family's reputation was currency. Real currency. It determined who respected your mother when she walked to the store. It determined whether your father's word was taken seriously at a neighborhood meeting. It determined whether your grandmother's request for help was honored quickly or slowly. A child who understood this did not need to be told to behave in public. They behaved because they understood the stakes. They understood that their conduct was not about them. It was about the people who would live on that block long after any particular incident had been forgotten, and who would benefit or suffer from the character that the child established in those early years. Now I want to step forward in time a little. We talked about the elders and the code they carried in their bones. Now let's talk about the middle generation, the fathers and the mothers in their prime, the men and women who had received the rules from the old ones and were now actively building the neighborhood, shaping it, holding it together with their daily choices. Their rules were more specific, more practical, more tied to the rhythms of how life actually moved on a block in the 1970s. Number 6. Keep your property clean whether you own it or rent it. This was non-negotiable, and it was enforced by community opinion in ways that could make a grown man uncomfortable. Your porch was swept, not eventually, not on the weekends, swept. The strip of sidewalk in front of your house was your responsibility regardless of what any city ordinance said. The grass got cut, the windows had curtains, and the curtains were clean. Not because the neighborhood was trying to impress anyone from the outside, but because the standard said something about what kind of people lived here and what kind of neighborhood this was going to be. The men and women who maintained their properties well were not doing it for aesthetics. They were doing it for the children. They were building an environment that told children every day, you live somewhere that is worth caring for. The people who live here take pride, and that pride is yours too. Mr. Harold, 2 houses down, kept his yard like a public garden. Flowers he had planted himself along the front walk, a vegetable patch in the back that he shared from every summer. He was not a wealthy man. He worked at the loading dock for 30 years and never made what any of those executives made. But his yard said, I am a man of substance. I come from people who planted things. And when you walked past his yard as a child, it gave you something without asking you to name it. Number 7. You did not let a neighbor struggle alone. If Mrs. Thompson's husband passed and she needed help getting groceries, or her yard needed tending, or her car needed to be looked at, the block handled it. Not one person, the block. Different people appeared at different times with different capabilities, and the whole thing organized itself without a committee or a meeting or anyone appointing themselves in charge. The block had read the situation and responded to it because that was what the block did. A neighbor in difficulty was everybody's difficulty. Not out of obligation. Out of the understanding that when your time came, and your time would come, the same network would appear at your door. That was the covenant. And the children watched all of this. Children were present for neighbor aid in a way that modern children rarely are. They were sent with casseroles. They were asked to help carry things. They were deployed as the neighborhood's errand corps, because they had energy and speed and nobody needed to pay them. And in exchange, they received something more valuable than money. They received an education in how a community actually functions. You carry for Mrs. Thompson today, and you understand for the rest of your life what it looks like when people take care of one another. You can't unlearn that. It lives in the body. Number 8. What happened on the block? Stayed on the block. This was serious. You did not take the neighborhood's business to outsiders. You did not gossip to people who didn't live on the block about what was happening inside the families who did. If Mr. Williams and his wife had a loud disagreement on a Thursday night, that was neighborhood information. It circulated internally as concern and as the quiet checking in that would follow over the next few days. It did not travel beyond the block's borders as entertainment. There was a distinction, clearly understood by every adult on that block, between internal communication and external broadcasting. The first was community. The second was betrayal. Children absorbed this rule through the same mechanism they absorbed most of the rules. They violated it once, and the response was swift enough and clear enough that the lesson took. You talked to your friend down the street about something that happened on the block, and word got back, as word always got back. And you sat across from your father at the kitchen table, and he looked at you in a way that you will never forget, and he said one thing: "We don't do that." 3 words. "We don't do that." And you never did it again. Number 9. Men worked. There were no exceptions. The men of the neighborhood in the 1970s did not discuss whether or not they were going to work. That question was not available. It had been answered before they were born, answered by their fathers and grandfathers who had taken whatever work the world offered: janitor, laborer, factory floor, loading dock, whatever was available, and brought it home with dignity. A man who did not work was not a man in difficulty for whom the neighborhood felt sympathy. He was a man who had violated a primary obligation, and the community's response to that was not angry, but it was clear. The children watched this too. They watched which men left the house before the sun was fully up. They noticed the work boots by the door, the lunch pails on the kitchen counter, the particular sound a working man's truck makes at 6:15 in the morning. They did not have to be told that this was the model. The model was demonstrated every day on every block by the men who built the neighborhood and kept it built. Number 10. Church was not optional. Not for children. Not for anyone who lived under a roof on that block. Now there were degrees. Some households were Baptist 3 times a week. Some were more occasional. But the cultural understanding was that Sunday morning had a destination. You dressed for it. The clothes were specific to it, kept for it, ironed for it. The children were bathed on Saturday night in preparation for Sunday morning, and the sequence of that Saturday bath was itself a ritual. The good towels, the good soap, the hair handled the night before so that Sunday morning was about dressing and not about hair. Church was the community's public face. It was the one place where the whole neighborhood appeared together, all at once, in their best presentation of themselves. And the standards of that appearance were high, not because God cared what you wore, but because the community was making a statement every Sunday to itself and to the world about what it was. We are here. We are whole. We are something. Number 11. Children were seen and heard, but only when permitted. This sounds harsh to modern ears, and I want you to sit with the discomfort for a moment before you decide it was wrong. Because what this rule protected was something precious: the space for adults to be adults. When grown people were talking, children occupied the periphery, not invisible, seen, not silent, but spoken when addressed. What the adults were doing in their conversations, their processing of the world, their discussion of real things, that was happening on a level above the children's level, and the children understood that the elevation was not permanent. It was developmental. Your time to speak freely as an adult would come, but it had to be earned. It had to be grown into. And in the meantime, you watched. You listened from the edges. You accumulated understanding without being aware that you were accumulating it. And then one day you were old enough to be pulled in, to be spoken to as an equal, to have your opinion solicited at the table. And by then you had 10 or 12 years of observation behind you, and you were not unprepared. You knew how adults talked. You knew how they reasoned. You knew how they handled things, because you had been watching all that time. Number 12. Food was never refused and never wasted. If a neighbor offered food, you accepted it. Not because you were hungry, not because it was your preference, because the offering of food was an offering of relationship, and to refuse it was to refuse the relationship. And food was not wasted. Not a biscuit, not a spoonful of rice, not the skin of a piece of chicken. In a neighborhood where most families had known the particular arithmetic of not quite enough, where you stretched things and saved things and used things all the way down to the bone, the act of throwing food away was an act of disrespect to everyone who had ever been hungry. The children understood this without anyone ever explaining the economics of scarcity. They understood it because the bowl was passed to them and they took what they needed, not more. And they ate what they took, all of it. That was the rule. It was taught by example rather than instruction, and it sank in deep. Now, family, We've been moving through the code from the top down, from the elders who established it to the working adults who maintained it. Let's come down now to the ground level. Let's come to where the children lived. Because the rules as a child experienced them had a texture that no adult version could fully capture. For a child in a black neighborhood in the 1970s, the rules were not abstract. They were immediate. They were physical. They were the specific geography of the block and the specific voices that came from specific porches and the specific consequences that followed specific mistakes. This is where the code became alive. Number 13. You come in. When the streetlights come on. Not after. No discussion. No exceptions, no, but just 5 more minutes. The streetlights were the signal, and you either understood the signal or you didn't. And if you didn't understand it the first time you ignored it, you understood it very clearly by the time your father finished explaining it in terms you would not forget. This was not arbitrary. The streetlights coming on meant the neighborhood was shifting registers. The children's portion of the day was over. The adults were taking custody of the night, and the night was not for children. There was something real behind the rule, real awareness of what the night could bring, real understanding of the vulnerabilities that the dark created. But none of that was spoken to the child. The rule was just given. Come in when the streetlights come on. And the child who internalized this rule deeply enough carried some version of it for the rest of their life. Not a curfew, an instinct, an understanding that the world shifts registers and you should be in the right register at the right time. Number 14. You did not disrespect the block with your mouth. Profanity in public on the block, within earshot of elders or women or small children, that was an immediate and serious offense. Not primarily because of the language itself, but because of what the language communicated. That you did not care about the standards of this space, that you were making the block into something less than what it was. Language was not casual in this context. Language was a statement about your relationship to the community, and profane language in public said, "I'm not taking this seriously." And the community responded to that the way it responded to any declaration of disrespect, swiftly and without sentimentality. A child who let a word slip within earshot of the wrong porch found out exactly how connected the block was, and how quickly information moved from the porch, where the word had been heard, to the kitchen table, where the child would be answering for it by dinner time. Number 15. Church clothes were sacred. You changed your clothes the moment you got home from church. This was not a suggestion. It was a rule with the force of law behind it. Church clothes were not play clothes. Church clothes were not watching TV clothes. Church clothes were not for any purpose except the purpose for which they had been acquired and maintained, appearing before God and the community in your best presentation. The act of changing the moment you came home was a ritual that said, "I understand the difference. I know that some things are kept for certain occasions, and that is what makes those occasions mean something." A child who came home from church and went straight outside without changing had revealed a gap in their understanding, and the gap would be addressed immediately by whichever parent reached them first. The iron, the good fabric, the particular shoes that were for Sunday. All of that had a sacred character that the children absorbed until it became instinct. Even now, family, if you grew up on those blocks, I'd bet you still feel something when you put on nice clothes for a serious occasion. That feeling was planted in you before you were old enough to name it. Number 16. You answered adults with yes or no, not yeah or nah. The precision of this rule mattered more than the children could understand at the time. It was not simply about the syllable, it was about the register, the signal sent by the response. Yeah said, "You are a peer of mine and I am responding to you casually." No sir or yes ma'am said, "I recognize your authority and I am responding to it appropriately." In a world where black children were often treated as if they were already adults and therefore had no claim to the care and protection that adults owe children, the neighborhood deliberately coded its children in the opposite direction. You will speak in a way that marks you as young and respectful. You will use the full word. You will use the honorific, not because you are diminished by it, but because you are practicing for a world in which how you address power determines what power does for you or to you. Yes, sir. No, ma'am. Those two phrases, practiced 10,000 times on that block, were weapons being placed in a child's hands. The children didn't know that, but the adults who insisted on it did. Number 17. You knew the names of every adult on the block. Not the man next door, not your friend's mother. Names, full names, or their honorific version. Mr. and Mrs. as appropriate. The child who did not know the name of an adult neighbor was a child who was not paying attention, and not paying attention was a form of disrespect in a neighborhood where everyone's existence was deliberate, and everyone's presence was worth acknowledging. Knowing the names was also practical, in a way the children eventually understood. If you were ever in difficulty, if something went wrong on the block, the name was the key. Being able to say Mr. Clarence Johnson said so was worth more than just saying a man down the street. Names carried authority. The name connected the deed to the person, and the person to the community. Children who learned names early were children who understood how the network worked, and that knowledge was safety. Number 18. You didn't ride in cars with people your parents didn't know. Simple. Absolute. The logic behind it was never fully explained to children because children didn't need the logic. They needed the rule. But the logic was this. Your parents had built a careful, known world around you, a world of vetted people and trusted relationships and understood accountability. A car with a stranger or a loosely known person was a hole in that world, a door into an unvetted space where the protections of the neighborhood did not extend. The rule was a wall against that hole. And the children who had it built into them deeply, so deeply that it became reflex rather than reasoning, were protected by it in ways they sometimes couldn't trace later in life. They would find themselves in a situation as a teenager or a young adult where the pull to get in the car was real, and the rule from childhood came back up from somewhere below conscious thought and said, no. And they didn't get in. And later, they were glad. Number 19. You helped without being asked. If you saw a neighbor carrying something heavy, you crossed the street and you helped. If you saw someone's groceries on the ground, you bent down. If you saw someone struggling with anything in your immediate vicinity, you went toward the problem. You did not wait to be asked. The waiting to be asked was itself a failure, because a neighbor who had to ask a child for help was a neighbor who had been made to feel like a burden, and making an elder feel like a burden was a violation of everything the block stood for. The child who ran toward the need without being told was the child the whole block talked about with warmth. The child who stood and watched until asked. That child was noticed too, but differently. Number 20. You did not fight each other in front of white people. I want you to hear this one carefully because it was the most political of all the neighborhood rules, and it was taught not with anger, but with strategy. Whatever conflict existed within the community, and every community has conflict, and the block had its arguments and its tensions and its two families that didn't speak and its grievances that ran years deep. None of it was put on display for outside eyes, because outside eyes would see the conflict and would not see the community. They would not see the context or the history or the relationship. They would see what they expected to see, and they would use it to confirm what they already believed. The elders who taught this rule were not denying conflict. They were protecting the community's narrative. They were saying, our internal business is ours. The way we settle things is ours. The way we love and fight and reconcile is ours. And we do not perform it for an audience that is not equipped to understand it. Children didn't always understand the full weight of this rule, but they understood the tone in which it was delivered, and tone is its own form of comprehension. Number 21. Big Mama's word was final. This does not need much elaboration. Every household had a version of this. The grandmother, the big mama, the elder matriarch, her word was the end of the conversation. Not up for appeal, not subject to a second opinion from a peer, not something that could be negotiated after she had spoken. Her word was final because she had earned it, through years, through sacrifice, through the particular form of wisdom that only comes from having seen enough of the world to know which things matter and which things only seem to matter. A grandmother in the 1970s who had been born in the late teens or early 20s had lived through the Depression and the war and the full weight of what it meant to be black in the American South. Her authority was not given to her. It was wrested from difficulty. When she spoke, the room went quiet. Not out of fear, out of recognition. That voice had been through things. That voice knew something your young body had not yet been required to learn. Number 22. You ate everything on your plate. We talked about this from the adult perspective earlier, the economy of not wasting food. But from a child's perspective, this rule had a different texture. It was the first negotiation you ever lost. There was nothing on that plate you could leave. Not the vegetable you didn't like, not the portion that was slightly more than you could comfortably eat. Not the thing you had tried before and didn't want to try again. The plate was presented and the plate was finished, and there was no drama attached to this expectation. No one sat beside you encouraging you through it. You simply ate it, because the rule was the rule, and the rule had no appeal process. And somewhere in the losing of that first negotiation, children learned something about the difference between preference and necessity. They learned that their comfort was not the organizing principle of the meal, that there were people who had prepared the food and people who needed to be fed, and that the child's personal feelings about collard greens were genuinely not the relevant variable. Number 23. You walked, you did not run, inside a neighbor's house. The same energy that you brought to the backyard and the alley and the vacant lot, that energy was checked at the door when you entered someone else's home. Any home. Not just the homes of elders, though especially those. Any home you entered as a child guest was entitled to your best indoor behavior, which meant controlled movement, a contained voice, hands to yourself, and awareness of everything around you that could be broken or displaced. The reason was never stated because the reason was obvious to anyone who thought about it for more than a moment. This is not your house. You are a guest here. The things in this house represent years of labor by the people who acquired them, and your carelessness with those things is your carelessness with their life's work. Children who understood this were children who understood at a foundational level that other people's things had value that was independent of your own desire to move through the world without friction. Number 24. If you got in trouble at school, you were in trouble twice. Once at school and once at home. Always. Without exception. The idea that a parent would go to the school to contest the teacher's account, to advocate for the child's version, to challenge the authority of the institution, that was not available on those blocks. Not in the 1970s. The teacher was a professional. The school was a place of learning and of standards, and the standards existed because the community that built those schools understood that education was survival. A child who acted up in school was a child who was interfering with their own survival, and the parent who received that information from the school did not cushion it. They amplified it. Because the message the parent needed the child to receive was not you got in trouble. It was the world expects something of you and you are responsible for meeting it. That expectation had no sympathy for your particular bad day, or your conflict with another child, or your feeling of unfairness. The expectation remained, and it was your job to rise to it. Number 25. You did not beg in public. Not for candy, not for a toy at the store, not for anything. The child who begged in public was a child who had not yet been taught the particular dignity that public composure represented. You could want things. Children are allowed to want things. But the expression of that want was managed, was contained, was kept inside the household rather than displayed on the street or in a store where strangers could see it. This was not cruelty. It was preparation. A person who learns early to manage the visible expression of desire is a person who will not be manipulated by their own wants later in life. A person who does not perform need for an audience develops a certain kind of interior strength that is hard to acquire any other way. The block taught this by embarrassing children who violated it once. The mother's look, delivered in a store, that cost the child nothing except the lesson, and the lesson once received was generally permanent. Number 26. You finished what you started. A child on the block in the 1970s who signed up for the church play was in the church play until it was finished. A child who said they would help someone rake leaves raked leaves until the job was done. A child who made a commitment of any kind, verbal, implicit, understood, was held to that commitment by the community in a way that made backing out essentially impossible. Not impossible as in physically prevented, but impossible as in the social cost of it was too high. Because on a block where everyone knew everyone and reputation was currency, a child who did not finish things was building a reputation in real time. And the adults on that block were not merely watching. They were doing the thing adults do when they observe a young person building a bad reputation. They said something. Not in the child's face necessarily, but in the presence of the child's family. They found a way to let the information travel to where it needed to go, and then the family handled it. That was the system. It worked. Number 27. You knew when to be invisible. This is one of the most nuanced rules and one of the most important. There were moments on the block. Adult moments, serious moments, moments of tension or grief or deliberation, when the correct position for a child was nowhere visible. You sensed when those moments were coming, and you made yourself scarce with efficiency and without being told, not because you were afraid, but because you understood that some things were not yours yet. Some conversations required a weight of experience you hadn't carried yet, and your presence in them would be a disturbance. The children who had learned this rule walked through the world with an awareness of the room, a social radar, a reading of the atmosphere, that served them for the rest of their lives. They never talked too much in meetings where they were the youngest person. They knew when to stand in the back. They understood that there was power in strategic silence, in the choosing of when to be seen and when to step back. The block taught them that. No classroom ever could. Number 28. Sunday was for family, not for friends. Saturday was the neighborhood's. Friday night belonged to whoever was old enough to claim it. But Sunday belonged to the people in your house. Sunday dinner was a closed ceremony, not unfriendly, not exclusive by animosity, but understood to be family time in a way that the rest of the week was not. Friends did not just drop by on Sunday afternoon. Invitations were specific and formal. The child who understood this did not need to be told when their presence at a friend's house was a Sunday intrusion. They could read it in the quality of the silence when the friend's mother opened the door. They would excuse themselves and they would mean it, and the friend's family would note the understanding and file it away under. That child was raised right. This is where James wants to slow down for a second, because we're getting close to the end of the list now, family. And the last few rules are the ones that don't sound like rules at all. They sound like something larger. They sound like the whole thing, compressed. Now, before we finish, I want to hear from you, family. I want you to go down to the comments right now, and I mean now, before this video ends, before you forget. And tell me the name of the adult on your childhood block who was not your parent but who corrected you once and you never forgot it. Give them their name. Give them their flowers. Because those people held our community together, and most of them are gone now, and they deserve to be remembered. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Number 29. Your community was yours to protect. Not the government's, not the police's, not anyone from outside the blocks. Yours. If someone came onto the block who did not belong there, the block noticed it, and the block handled the noticing quietly and efficiently without drama, through the network of eyes and the movement of information, and the particular attention that comes from people who are paying attention to their own place. Children understood this too. They understood which faces were neighborhood faces and which ones were not. They understood the obligation of awareness. They understood that the safety of the block was not a thing that arrived from outside. It was generated internally by the people who lived there, through their daily attention to the space. A child who had this instilled in them carried it wherever they went for the rest of their life. An attentiveness to their environment, a sense of ownership over whatever space they occupied, a willingness to be responsible for it. Number 30. You remember where you come from. This was the last rule, and it was the longest lasting. It was not enforced the way the other rules were enforced, not through correction or consequence in the immediate term. It was enforced by the accumulation of everything else. By the time you had lived through the first 29 rules, by the time you had been corrected by Mr. Williams and fed by Mrs. Thompson and taught by watching and shaped by the name of every adult on that block, By that time, the remembering was not a rule you had to keep. It was a thing inside you that you could not put down even if you tried. And some people tried. Some of them left those neighborhoods as fast as they could and as far as they could and built new lives with new geography, and tried to leave the block behind like something they had outgrown. But the block doesn't leave you. The rules don't leave you. The voice of the elder on the porch saying, "Where do you think you're going?" That voice doesn't leave you. It just goes quiet for a while. And then your own child steps off the porch and one foot is barely off the step, and something in your chest opens up and you hear yourself saying, "Where do you think you're going?" And you realize in that moment that you have become the rule. That the block didn't just teach you, it is you. That everything those elders built, all that careful, invisible, unwritten architecture of care and consequence and community, all of it ran through you and is now running through your children if you let it, if you remember it, if you tell it, if you hold it up to the light the way we've tried to do today and say, "This was real, this was good, this was something." Child, let me tell you something. What we had on those blocks in the 1970s was not poverty with a nice face on it. It was not nostalgia painted over hardship. It was a complete system, a working system, a system where children were never alone, where adults were never without community, where the old were never discarded, where the young were never without guidance, where food was shared and trouble was shared and joy was shared, and the whole thing was held together not by money or institutions, but by the daily practice of people choosing each other. We didn't have much, but family, we had everything that mattered. And somewhere out there are children who have never known a neighborhood like that. Children who have never had Mr. Williams on their block, who have never eaten from Mrs. Thompson's pot, who have never had to explain themselves to an elder who knew their name and their grandmother's name and the particular way their family handled things. And I think about those children. I think about what they're missing and what it costs them and what we might do even now, even in the world we're living in today, to give them some version of it. The rules don't require a 1970s block to work. They require people who remember, people who are willing to be the elder on the porch, the neighbor with the hot plate, the adult who says something when something needs to be said. That's what we're building here, family. That's what this channel is. I'll see you next time, family.